All right, we're live. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We have a real special training this week, mostly because it's not a training and it's just pure opinion and very little fact. With me, as always, is Alexis Abril. Hello, Alexis. And joining us this week is Kevin Phillips.
Hello.
Hey, Kevin. You want to kind of say your background and where you're calling in from?
Sure. I'm a JavaScript developer. I've been doing that for 6 years now or so. I live in Chicago, so I'm calling from there.
So he's calling right down the road from me. Well, actually, you're in the suburbs, right?
Yeah, I don't really live in Chicago. So. Close enough.
Yeah, everybody says they're from Chicago if you're from the suburbs. Yeah. No one would know, like, what suburb are you from?
I live in Westmont.
Westmont. I don't even know where that is, and I'm from Chicago. I assume it's west.
Yeah, about 20 miles straight west.
What's a mont? I don't know.
Mountain. I don't know.
Mountain?
There's no mountains, so I don't know.
Is there a mountain? There's not many mountains in Illinois. So, yeah, this week, like I said, pure conjecture, we are going to talk about a very biased framework comparison. Before this, like these last kind of trainings, we previously talked about architecture and kind of like what Bitovi values and why. We're kind of continuing with this theme. I think this is the last one of these. And then we're going to the training moving forward is going to be all about Done.js, our kind of super framework that is the combination of CanJS and StealJS and FuncUnit and Document.js, a bunch of other technologies. But before we do that, it's good to give at least our interpretation of what frameworks, the different frameworks, different module loaders, what they provide, what they value, to help actually maybe guide you through a good decision when picking yours. We're obviously very biased, and I'm by no means an expert in the other frameworks or technologies, what their capabilities are. I think very few people are actually capable of comparing frameworks effectively, because you would really have to build an app in every single one of them, or maybe two apps, really to get a feel for it. But I think being a library author, and if I try to be as intellectually honest as possible, we can probably provide at least a good feel. So with that disclaimer aside, let's get started. So I put a little gist together just to help me walk through some points. And if anybody has questions on, any questions on this stuff or comments, please share in the Gitter chat room, which I should have open. It's Gitter Bitovi, or GitHub, Gitter Bitovi JS training. Hey, there it is. My first time live. Hey, Daniel. Okay. So first, we're going to start with module loaders. We're going to talk about RequireJS and RJS, Browserify, Webpack, and StealJS. And I kind of highlighted what I think are the most important things, and we'll talk about each of them. But fortunately, Webpack has a pretty decent comparison, where for the most part, you can substitute StealJS for JSPM, which are based on similar technologies, and most of your answers this will give you, except people are complaining about this one, but StealJS actually has bundle arithmetic, and I will talk about that. So I'm just going to start kind of walking through what this comparison means. But first, let's talk about the actual projects that we'll be talking about. So the first is RequireJS. This is made by James Burke. This is probably one of the first module loaders. I actually think StealJS predates it, but let's say that this is the first really good one. It's very stable. I think 2.1 was released maybe, I forgot when it was released, but not too long ago, so it's still being updated. Works, yeah, like an IE6, perfectly fine. This is the AMD syntax, which some of you hopefully have seen before, where you write, there we go, use jQuery. You write define, let me blow that up. You write define and then an array of arguments or of dependencies, and when all of those things have loaded, it will call back with the exported value of whatever is loaded here. And it has a bunch of configuration options. We'll talk about that, but that's RequireJS. Browserify is its main goal is let you require your modules like CommonJS. CommonJS is what you use in Node, where you write in Node like require foo, and that will go find where foo is and find its export and return to you foo. So Browserify aims to essentially let you use Node packages or NPM packages in the browser. Great project, very, very popular. We'll go into the benefits and drawbacks of that. And then there's Webpack. I think Webpack's goal is very similar to what StealJS's is to be kind of like a kitchen sink solution for dealing with modules in JavaScript, although it really highlights its module bundler, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. And then there's finally our StealJS, and this again is its primary purpose is to speed up application load times and support kind of every syntax, and then also simplify working with modules, exporting them, and things like that. So those are the main module loaders, and there's also JSPM, but JSPM and Steel are, I can kind of talk about the difference of them. I just didn't prepare for that. But this actually lists JSPM, but Steel is pretty similar. So I'm going to quickly go through this comparison and kind of talk about what each one of these things mean, and then you can see what different engine or what different library module loaders support what. So CommonJS require, that means can you write require in a piece of code and it actually load things from Node modules? Or actually, can you even make it work at all? I think this is what this means. So CommonJS, does it support CommonJS? Webpack does. RequireJS kind of does, but you have to do it in this weird syntax, which looks like define. I think you just can write define, and this gives you require and exports, and then you can write require jQuery like that, and then you can export things. So this isn't real, like that's why there's the disclaimer on this site. The disclaimer, I don't know what the question is. Alexa,
I got that one. I can type it in.
Alexis, if you want to, well, do we want to answer it, or do you want to ask for these? Sum up and ask me?
Sure. The question was, is it even necessary to use frameworks or libraries?
Yes, absolutely. If you're building anything, the importance of this is so much that I will switch to my face when I explain the importance of this. Absolutely. Unless you're building just the most simple, adding the most simple behavior ever, or you can just you just need one widget on your page, you need a framework, because we kind of talked about this before, the importance of observables. in previous lectures and how they help you write, I guess, good code. Code that's not going to suffer from the handshake problem, where every one piece of code needs to talk to every other. And because JavaScript doesn't provide a form of observables, you would have to pretty much invent your own. And by you inventing your own, you've just created a framework yourself that's not documented, not tested, not reviewed over by a community. So you will end up wasting a lot of time when you could have just learned a different framework. So that hopefully that answers the question. So yeah, you have to. I would strongly encourage you to learn a framework. And the good thing is frameworks are kind of like languages, human languages, that once you kind of learn one or two, the rest become relatively easy to pick up. They all have their way of doing observability, or they have their way of doing templating or routing, and slight variations in the way and the syntax that things get hooked up. But in general, I feel like I could pick up go to any other framework and pick it up pretty quick at this point. So back to this comparison. Okay, so the RequireJS resolve, this essentially lets you put in a module identifier, and I think which hopefully Matthew talked about last week, and gives you back the actual fully resolved URL for that. There are no's everywhere here, but in reality, at least for, I'm pretty sure RequireJS has something similar, and I know Steel does, where you can do call normalize, and then you can call locate with the result of that. So they kind of provide it, but they're not going to provide require resolve explicitly, at least not StealJS, because it's synchronous. Its whole lookup and is asynchronous. This function is synchronous, but Steel works asynchronously and could not provide a synchronous version of this. Well, it couldn't provide a good one. It could provide a terrible one, but not a good one. CommonJS exports. So yeah, all Webpack, Browserify, they support CommonJS. Webpack, obviously, RequireJS supports AMD. Browserify has a plugin for it, but it doesn't work with require part of AMD. So this is normally how you define a module's dependencies, but if you want to require and not define a module, doesn't look like Browserify supports that. AMD require loads on demand. So this is, can you progressively load scripts if you want to? So yes, you can, but you can't with Browserify. Hopefully Matthew talked a little bit about this last week, and Alexis, please fill me in if he did not. I'm gonna need to kill the feathers conversation or sign out because I'm getting too many of these. Excuse me, 1 second. Did I get feathers? All right, there we go. So there's two types of loading resources typically. There's when your app is first loading, those are all your static resources, and then later when the user does something, often you want to progressively load some additional code, so you're not having to load everything at once. That's what this kind of progressive loading on demand means. Can you generate a single bundle? Yes, you can do this everywhere. Can you load each file separate? What this means is can you just refresh the browser and does it load every single file individually that your application needs to load? This is great for development mode. For Webpack, you have to build every single time, and same with Browserify. RequireJS and StealJS and JSPM, you do not have to do that. You don't actually even have to have a server running, and it will still work. You don't even have to have Node with RequireJS and JSPM, and you can still develop with it. That's really useful. Multiple bundles. This means can you break up your application and load different parts of it in production, so that you could load like a core bundle and then one other pages bundle. Can you progressively load additional chunks? You cannot do this with CommonJS, but yes, you can do this with Webpack, JSPM, and StealJS, and with RequireJS. This is part of that progressively loading your application. This is really important, which is very hard to do with CommonJS. Multi-pages build with common bundle. With JS, so this means, like, let's say I have, Alexis, did Matthew talk about Steel's progressive loading last week?
No, we didn't get into that far.
Really? Okay. So what did he talk about?
Last week was mostly an intro to StealJS. So.
Oh, but that you gotta sell the biggest feature of it, though. You're going to talk about it. So let me give a quick. Here's my keynote here. This one. Probably this one. Nope. Let's go with this one. So multi-pages build, what this means is, let's say I have 4 different pages, and each page needs to load, like the home page needs to load homepage.js, and category needs to load category.js, and the product page needs to load product.js, and so forth. And they have these overlapping dependencies, right? Can I build, and this is what Steels does, but I'm not going to go into it right now. Can it essentially build bundles? Can you build bundles, or can it build bundles, the system build bundles, so that when your app loads, for instance, so now if I were to load homepage, I would load, instead of every file individually, I would load homepage.js, and then I would load the H+C bundle, which included these things that were shared by homepage plus category, and then I would load the H+C+P+R bundle that had things that were shared with everything. So this is kind of showing what everything would need to load. So that is part of what it means multi-pages build with common bundle. So you can do this with Webpack if you manually configure what belongs in every bundle. I think it's true also you can only do this in RequireJS if you with manual configuration. I don't think it does this automatically for you. It might. I doubt it does it the same way that StealJS does with the bundle arithmetic. What StealJS does, it has this very complex algorithm that will essentially try to figure out the best bundles to build so that your app has to load as few scripts as possible, but each script is highly optimized. So StealJS is kind of like a gold. This is one of its strongest things. It's like a gold star here. So this is now we're going to come to what I think is Webpack's strongest feature, where it can handle. You can see all the no's everywhere else. Webpack lets you handle non-static static dependencies. What I mean is, most module loaders, when you write something like jQuery equals require jQuery, Not CommonJS in Node, but Browserify works this way. AMD works this way if it's doing a build, but doesn't have to work this way. But most module loaders, what they do is they actually parse your JavaScript in some way, and they see the word jQuery here inside require, and they know this module has a dependency on, oops, where did that go? This module has a dependency on jQuery. But, and that's how most of them work. But what Webpack is smart enough to do, which is nice for Node, because Node can handle things like this, right? Because Node, you never build a Node app really. So people, and this kind of happens on demand. So people might have, it's very common, people might have something like some logic, and then they'll have something like the module name, and they'll have some logic, and then if one thing it'll return jQuery, and another thing it might return Zepto or something like that. People sometimes write their Node modules like this, which is horrible. I don't actually know if Webpack can handle this kind of thing, but it can handle some dynamic. It has limited dynamic ability to inspect or figure out the how do I say this? Limited ability to kind of figure out what the dependencies are. StealJS actually used to work this way, but it was so prone to breaking the build that we abandoned it. I don't know if Webpack underneath the hood has like figured out some middle ground that we were never able to figure out, but that seems to be one of its big strengths. My guess is that it just has a few basic rules that it allows, but not. Oh, with manual configuration, it looks like. So it probably allows some basic rules, but not all. But maybe it gets you to like 99.9% of Node modules, where StealJS and JSPM and Browserify maybe only support 90% or 95%. I don't know. In my experience, though, this isn't worth it. Like, there's few times where I've really needed that. Requireable files and plugins, I think this means the same thing. Can you have plugins? Like, can you load CoffeeScript? Yes, everybody can do that. Can you pre-process source code and convert it if you want to like convert CoffeeScript to something else? Can you do that pre-processing? I would actually say that JSPM and StealJS have a big advantage here because they are based on ES6 module loader spec, so their translate hook is actually what, if the browsers ever do support ES6 modules, any plugins written for System.js and for StealJS and JSPM should just work without in the future, which would be really nice. Without actually having to have JSPM or StealJS, you can still just use the plugins. That's one advantage that I really need to talk about that I think I forgot in my bullet points. Watch mode. This means what watch mode means is while I'm writing code, will it make a new build for me? So if I like change a file, if I were to change a file, if I change this from require, let's say my file looked like this, and I changed it to say Zepto, does a new export, does the build system produce a new output so that the browser, I can refresh the browser and not have to like run anything on the command line. You do have to do this with Browserify. So it says yes for Browserify and for Webpack. And that's because this is in kind of contrast with the load each file separate. So these say yes here and no here, and these say yes here and not required here, or not needed in dev. What this means is, again, it's because RequireJS and StealJS are able to just to run purely in the client and make AJAX requests to load all their JavaScript code, or just add script tags to load the JavaScript code, as the case with RequireJS. Because of that, they don't even need a watch mode. You just refresh the browser and they will load everything they need. However, Webpack and Browserify need a watch mode to detect if you've changed a file and then redo the build so you can reload your page. Debugging support, source URL, source maps, and that kind of thing. They all have everything for the most part. You'll notice for RequireJS, it's not required, and this is because it works great because it adds just normal script tags and works via JavaScript, so none of this stuff is actually needed, which is good, which is really nice. So if you're working in what I would say, well, I'll get to my recommendations, but I'll give one hint right now. If you're in a system where you got to support like IE6, and you're going to spend a lot of time there debugging like IE6, 7, or 8, then I would actually still probably use RequireJS, just because the debugging support is so much better there for older browsers. You're going to have you're going to pretty much have to run in production all the time for everybody else. So it's not impossible, it's just not going to be fun. Node.js built in, so you can require path and things like that. This means that there's some built-ins in Node, like Node has a path module that comes with Node and isn't like npm installed. Can you load those built-ins? And yes, you can, pretty much everywhere. You can't with AMD because these are authored in CommonJS, and RequireJS doesn't allow you to load CommonJS bundles. Other things that Node environment provides, does the engine provide them? So yes, pretty much across the board, where CommonJS is supported. What this means is, can you configure a different module or a different behavior for your module when it's loaded in the browser versus when it's being loaded by Node.js? And yes, everybody allows some form of that. When you want to minimize, can you minimize your bundle? Yes, everybody pretty much uses Uglify. StealJS uses Uglify. Mingle path names, I'm not actually sure what that means, so I'm going to skip that one. I'm not actually sure. And then finally, the runtime overhead. This is how much it takes to, like, in production, how much you have to do, how much code has to load other than what code you actually wrote. You can see, I think this is the other thing Webpack really likes to be good at, is a very small amount extra per module per dependency. RequireJS, I don't think this is counting using Almond, where if you were doing Almond, I think this would be much less than 14.7 kilobytes. Browserify has a little bit, and then would be very similar to StealJS's. So there's more or less 5 kilobytes though. In reality, I mean that's something you do want to shave off, but the multi-builds, the progressive loading and things like that can, in my opinion, with StealJS more than make up for this 5 kilobyte disadvantage at the beginning. So let's go back to mine. So what my overview for when you should use what and what I think is it's best at. RequireJS is really good. That's probably my go-to if I had to support a lot of old browsers. and I wanted something that's just very stable. There's a lot of a lot of stuff out there, guides and things like that, well documented. That's like really good for that. Now, for Browserify, I think Browserify is really nice in how like quickly and easily you can kind of get started if you're coming from a NPM background, right? Like you can just require your modules how you're used to. If you're in a Node NPM background, Browserify is amazing because you can, it's just you just run Browserify, point it at a module, it builds it to an output. It's very easy and lightweight to get started. I think if you were like, I don't know, if you're kind of a beginner and just kind of building a more simple app and you want to be able to npm install stuff, and I think Browserify is a great choice there. It doesn't have a lot of advanced features that I think you need for like a really big, fast, complex site, but I think it's a very nice tool. I guess that's the way I think about it. Webpack and StealJS are very similar, so it's hard for me to like, contrast these and say where you should use one and not the other. I think Steal's advantage is it's got two things that it does better than Webpack, which is its progressive loading algorithm is really good. That whole building things so they become progressively loaded and breaking apart your app so it can be loaded on demand is something StealJS can do for you very easily, way better than you could ever manually configure. So that's a real big strength of it. The exporting that StealJS does, so StealJS also lets you very easily take your application and export it to all the other formats, which is very nice if you're doing open source development. That's really what Steal's thing is about. With Webpack, outside of that, I think Webpack would be better than StealJS if you were using a lot of if you were using a lot of modules written for a Node environment that you wanted to just work. I'm sure Webpack is going to work a lot better in that situation. I think there's probably better documentation. There's definitely a bigger community for Webpack. If those things are important, then Webpack is probably a good option for that. Both Webpack and StealJS have hot module replacement or live reload. So when you change a module, that module can just be replaced, and the whole application doesn't have to load again. I'm kind of partial to StealJS over Webpack, mostly because of the technology. It's based on System.js and ES6 module loader, and it can work just purely in the client. I think that is a technological foundation that'll make StealJS hopefully better in the long run, because there's advantages there. Hopefully that, like, if browsers land ES6 module loaders, the plugins will all work and things like that. I'm a big believer in doing kind of things from the client perspective as much as you can. I think Webpack and StealJS kind of differ in that, and we'll see how that plays out. Any comments from Alexis or Kevin?
I agree. I think RequireJS is probably the most stable if you're working with like older tech, but with the state of everything today, the workflow in Steel, just being able to write an ES6 and just use npm for a manifest file is huge. I'm sorry, a package JSON. For those that are unfamiliar, I don't think we went over this last week either, is the Npm Workflow. Something that's different in all of these loaders and Steel is with every loader, you basically have to have some kind of manifest that says where you look for stuff. So if you require jQuery, where is jQuery? You have to tell it with a loader where to look. But you already have a manifest probably today with package.json or bower.json if you're using one of those loaders, which tell you where that stuff already is. So what Steel does that kind of is unique in my book is it's going to utilize your existing dependency manager as its manifest.
Well, Browserify does that, and I'm pretty sure Webpack does that too. I don't know if Webpack does it with. I don't know if Webpack does it with Bower. For sure, Browserify does not do it with Bower, but I'm pretty sure they all do it with package.json.
Gotcha. By they all, you mean Webpack and Browserify?
Webpack and Browserify. Yeah, not AMD, not RequireJS, but I'm pretty sure. Matthew would know more than me, but I'm pretty sure everybody at this point can kind of load from package.json.
Sweet. Just to answer or to respond to one of the comments in the chat, D.A. Merms, not sure how to pronounce that, but there was a link to a survey for front-end tooling. I think the blog post is pretty interesting, but I don't think the numbers are big enough for it to be statistically relevant. It was a survey conducted over what frameworks you're using, what libraries, what tools, in different parts of a UI application.
Interesting. Cool. All right. So, yeah, I have a. We'll get to that when we start talking about frameworks now. About popularity. All right. So now let's talk about the frameworks. So the way I look at frameworks, just to kind of break it down, is I really look at how it deals with observables and derived values. We'll start with React. ReactJS made by Facebook. React's thing is mostly just to be like it's kind of like a templating engine in a lot of ways. It provides a way to express the HTML of your page with kind of data, and what it has is it uses diffing to update the DOM. So what that means is, let's take a look at my little example here. So often you'll have a renderer function, and this will be some JSX, which allows you to include some HTML in your JavaScript files, right? This needs to be processed, of course, but a lot of things can do this processing. Like almost everything supports JSX, which is pretty cool. This renderer function essentially is going to return what's called a virtual DOM, and a virtual DOM looks kind of similar to a normal DOM. And if you don't know what I mean by a DOM, I mean like it looks like it's a representation of JavaScript objects that look like it's a collection of JavaScript objects that look like or represent DOM elements. So like this H1 has an anchor inside of it, which has React inside of it. I don't know if you can see that. It might be a little small, but just to give people a general idea, let's say I had an H1 and it had a span element and then had hello, something like that. What React will compile this code to, actually I'll just take this code. This makes it a little bit easier to understand. What React effectively does in one step is take this code and compile that into something like maybe it's an array and it's got this is not exactly what it looks like, but the idea is the same. Maybe there's a div element and then it has children, and the first child is a H2. Tag is H2. And then this thing has children, and it's eventually going to combine. It's going to take whatever full name was, and if it's like Alexis Abril, it's going to produce something like this. And then what it can do is compare that to some other place in the page where maybe the real element is, where there's that real div. Maybe this, let's just give this an ID. And maybe there's div ID. Maybe this is in the page, and what it can do is say, oh, it can very quickly look at this object and compare it to what this div, maybe this div is empty right now. It can say, hey, the children of this div are missing. So I'm going to create those elements and insert them in here. Right? So this is the underlying technology and idea of React. And the benefits are that it allows you to use plain JavaScript objects, right? This code right here might be part of some larger construct in React, some like custom element or something like that. I can read the property. It can be passed properties, and this props is just a normal object, and that's a huge advantage that Angular and React share. I think JSX, which allows you to put your HTML in your JavaScript, which was despised, heavily despised at like the JSConf that launched it. I think that time has shown that people really don't mind this, and it kind of is convenient to write code this way. So that's really nice. The diffing, that ability for it to only update the smallest part. So let's say, where did it go? So let's say I called that render function again. And this time, full name had changed to like Justin Meyer. React will diff again this DOM and then not even have to update, like not even change the H2. It'll just change the text node that's inside the H2 from Alexis Abril to Justin Meyer. That diffing allows you, the developer, to, I think, be a little sloppier, which is actually a good thing most of the time, in terms of how you deal with updating your data. I've kind of given another example. I'm not exactly sure. I forgot how to loop in React. I think you can just write in each or something like that. I don't remember. But I'm just gonna pretend like I know what I'm doing with React, because I think I understand the technology enough to be able to do it. So let's say I had a bunch of people, and for each person, something like this. I'm just going to guess. I don't know if it's like EJS in that it can do this kind of thing. I have no clue, but we'll see. So I do person, and I want to list each person's full name or something like that. I'm not sure React can handle this, but the diffing, I'm sure it can in some form, where I would loop through every single person in people and write out each person's full name. Now, React can handle situations very nice where, let's say, like my people array, I wanted to change it from, you know, I'm just going to put out each person, so it's just an array of names, not first name and last name. So it's like Justin, Kevin, it's just the people, looks like this. Justin, Kevin, Alexis. Now, with React, with most frameworks, or like even CanJS until recently, if I had just replaced people, if I did something equivalent of people equals, a new array, and I removed Kevin, CanJS would have to rewrite every single H2. Where React would only have to remove the H2 that represents Kevin, because its diffing would be able to handle that. By the way, Alexis and Kevin, what I'm saying makes sense. There's been no
Yeah.
So I don't. Okay.
So far, so good.
Okay. Cool. So, anyways, React would be able to do would be able to just remove Kevin. Now, this problem is fixed in CanJS can handle this. So instead of in CanJS formerly, you would have had to do instead of just being able to replace the array wholesale, you would have had to be a little bit smarter and go people.slice or splice 1 to remove Kevin. And then CanJS would do the right thing and only remove the H2 element. So this is, in terms of performance, overall performance, this is of course much better because you're mutating the you're mutating the array structure instead of like cloning it and recreating a new one, right? This operation could run much faster. But with React, React acknowledges that most of the horrible performance in most applications is manipulating the DOM. So React is in some ways like a catch-all that just says you update your data layer however you want to in the worst ways possible, and we will try to limit the amount of time it takes to do a DOM update, and we'll try to make that as fast as possible with a diff, by doing a diff. So back to this. That diffing, my kind of, well, there's two other things I want to say about this diffing in general. The diffing in general is a n-squared algorithm, which isn't super fast, right? But React has a lot of optimizations to try to make it linear. That means no matter what change you make, you're always getting a linear update. You're always having this linear diff run. When I mean linear, I mean it's like it has to run through every single element. What I mean by linear is that anytime you change your data, no matter how you change it, whether you splice or whether you replaced people wholesale, it's looping through every single div in the page and every single H2 and all of the subcontent. It's looping through every single element and of the current content and what's new and figuring out a diff there in linear time. So if you have a lot of elements, it's going to have to go through all of them. Where I'll talk about it with more direct observables like CanJS has, if you do people splice here, we don't have to go through every element. We know about the H2 for that person. We will just remove that one element. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. As long as the diff runs an acceptable performance, then you're fine. So having the ability to not really care about your data so much or how you manipulate it has kind of led to what's called reactive architecture, which has a lot of, to me it's mostly MVVM. The only difference that I really see that people do with React versus any other approach is they really don't ever have shared state. You're always cloning and recreating when one component calls another component. It's always essentially passing a copy of the data and not the data itself. That is very nice because it can prevent bugs, but again, then there's a lot of copying and cloning of your data layer. So there could be performance concerns there with that kind of, if that is what reactive architecture really is, which I really think that's what reactive architecture should be called, not the one-directional data flow because MVVM is mostly that anyways. I don't know. I think I think that's really nice, but it can have downsides. I saw a React talk a couple weeks ago, and when you have to, if you want one widget, basically React, you have this huge object. You can, it seems like, have this big object that represents the entire state of the application, but that doesn't make things very composable. I don't know. I can come back to explaining that if people have more questions about it. But I want to move on to Angular because we're almost out of time. Angular, so you can see here how you would do kind of like a full name in React. In Angular, you kind of two ways of doing it. One is you can create on your scope a full name function where you combine your first and last on your scope. Or you could listen to a first name or last name change and update a full name property on your scope. This is going to be worse in terms of performance than this. This is a better way of doing it, but less, this is much more terse and kind of friendlier, I think. Is there someone unmuted themselves? No?
I did. I was going to help you out with intuitive. It sounded like you were searching for a word.
Okay. So Angular, like React, lets you deal with plain JavaScript objects. These things are just there's not so much observables as it's using what's called dirty checking to know when to update the page. So it can also default to using object observe, which is in some browsers. I don't know what percentage, but it's definitely in the most modern. I think it's definitely in Chrome, but there's object.observe. This allows you to listen to properties on an object change, but there's no, you can't know when full name changes unless you call this function over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So what Angular will do in that situation is just keep calling that function over and over and over again, and when it changes, update the DOM accordingly. If there's full name in a template, it will update full name, but it's constantly checking for when stuff changes. But that dirty checking does allow you to use plain JavaScript objects. The other nice thing about Angular, in my opinion, is it's embeddable in the page. You can
just real quick before you go into that, is Angular actually using object.observe? I know you said this before, and I haven't seen anywhere where they said that.
I think it does, like in browsers that support it, or definitely Angular 2 is designed to work that way.
Okay.
I don't know if Angular is using object observe. So,
okay.
But that's a good question. So, Angular allows you to embed. You can build custom elements with Angular. Angular is really like the first library to really support custom elements. And then not only that, it might be unique in that you can directly put your custom elements in Angular in the page, which is freaking awesome. That I can, like, if I create a Angular directive that's like date picker, I can just put a date picker element in the page. Now Angular does have, you kind of have to deal with the flash of unstyled content problem a little bit with Angular when you're doing things like that, but that's a really nice feature that I love of Angular. It's, in my opinion, probably its best feature. Angular makes heavy use of dependency injection. This is a way of kind of like registering some type of functionality or some types of functionality, and you can replace that functionality with some tested mock-up of functionality. Angular lets you do that pretty easily and readily and encourages you to do it. That's nice that it has that, and it kind of guides people to do that, makes things more testable. Angular also comes with, which is nice, but it's not great. It comes with like limited different types of input support, like date picker and things like that. and internationalization support, but it's not great support. It's not like it polyfills a date picker if the browser doesn't support a date picker with like almost a duplicate version of it. So most of the time you're still having, like, Firefox doesn't have a native date picker. So you have to include your own date picker anyways. So that's kind of Angular on a high level, in my opinion. Backbone, good old Backbone, lightweight, simple to use, very much like CanJS 1.0. Lot of documentation. It isn't changing very much. Now there's some third-party add-ons that are really nice for it, but Backbone just isn't like growing with new features and changing technology. It's kind of my. But Backbone, you know, was huge for a while. It's still very stable project. Oh, and if you're a beginner, I think Backbone is a great framework to check out, because I think if you're used to like jQuery and you're coming from that world, you can pick up Backbone really quickly, and in some ways it's like, you know, the starter drug for more of these, like, you know, I would say advanced maybe isn't the right word, but more radically different framework technologies. Next is Ember. Here's how you would kind of do the full name example with Ember. So Ember has direct observables. So again, I'll kind of do a summary of everything at the end of this. But Ember has direct observables. Here I can create a person kind of object with a full name property that is a composite of the first name and last name properties. Notice here I have to list first name and last name again to let it know what it cares about. That's very similar to what I kind of had to do in Angular for this case. Like, hey, say, well, when first name changes, update full name. So what Ember does right, in my opinion, is it's really good documentation for like onboarding. Its getting started guide is really nice. It's got a really good, and I think maybe the first, like, if you're doing a single page app where your users are going from one page to the next page, it has this kind of tree-based routing that is very practical. And you know, it's kind of, a lot of other things have adopted its pattern. I know React's router has picked this up. Ember is heavily convention over configuration. If you're like Ruby on Rails, like React's router, if you define a route, it will implicitly try to find certain, like, I think it's like controllers or certain models or certain templates. It tries to find all of this stuff in a certain folder just based on creating a route. It will dynamically like look for those things based upon your route name. So if you like that kind of stuff, then Ember, right? If you don't want to like, it is a very important thing when you're building apps to have, I forgot the word I always used for this. It starts with a D, like directive or derived or I don't know. Like it's basically when you if you learn the pattern on how to build an app, you can follow this pattern to like create the entire app. So if one person built code in Ember, like someone else who knows Ember could probably just jump right into that code really easily. Ember uses handlebars very heavily. Even for like their kind of version of custom elements is still in like a handlebars directive. It does automatic batching, which is nice. So that's kind of my take on Ember. And finally is CanJS. That's our framework. It has direct observables as well. Here I can create a observable map and create a full name computed value. I can do it that way, or I can do it like if I wanted instead a person constructor, kind of like the Ember form, where it had a full name property, I could use the define plugin to do it this way with CanJS. So CanJS, like my opinion on CanJS is it's like the best of, well, not the best, it's like jack of all trades, master of none, is the way that I look at CanJS, right? CanJS has decent documentation, but it's kind of out of date, especially its getting started guide compared to something like Ember. CanJS has direct observables, and I think they're better than Ember's because you don't have to do this kind of stuff. It can infer what you're binding to, so I didn't have to relist first and last here. But its routing, CanJS's routing, is for like the single page app where you're going from one page to the next page. It is not as nice as Ember's, but it can do things that Ember's cannot do. Where if you had a single page with like kind of independent parts that need to operate a little bit on their own, CanJS's routing will actually help you a lot there compared to something like Ember's. Angular and React let you use plain JavaScript objects. And this is a huge advantage for beginners because you don't have to learn a direct observable like CanJS's CanMap or Ember's Ember object, or Backbone kind of has like their their Backbone collections and models are slightly observable. They have events and things like that. So that has a big advantage. But CanJS is, in terms of updating the DOM, is going to be faster than React because it doesn't have to do a diff and can update just what needs to be updated. Angular, it doesn't have the dirty checking that's running. So the kind of way that I look at, but Angular and React are going to have huge communities, which is really nice, but I would say that we are, at least at Bitovi, we're pretty active on Gitter and responding to people's issues and things like that. So, I don't know. Like, if I were to give advice on what situation to pick, what? So, Angular and React are kind of like, to me, very similar. But if it were me, I would probably pick React. Well, the bad part about React is that you have to tell it when to update. Where Angular will figure that out, Ember will figure that out, and CanJS will figure that out for you. Now, there's frameworks with React that will tell you this, but that's kind of lame. Like, I just want to be able to update first name, and that's all I have to do, and the framework takes care of redrawing the template and updating the page for me. I haven't had to do that for a while. You kind of have to do that in Backbone. If that doesn't bother you and you want that control and you just want something lightweight, and React is probably a pretty good solution there. So I would say Angular, if you want to be able to use plain JavaScript objects, but don't have to worry about updating the page. Oh, one other bad thing about React is it's very difficult to, at least I've heard at the last talk I was at for React, it's very difficult to use like a jQuery UI widget with React. So Angular, if you want to use like jQuery UI widgets and things like that, and you don't want to have to update the page, but Angular is a little funky to me always. But Angular would be what I would look for then. Backbone, if you were a beginner, like I said, looking for something simple to kind of get your feet wet with frameworks in general, good thing to learn, make your kind of first app with, Backbone would be a really good solution, I think. Ember, I think Ember is a good solution if you're building something like humongous and simplistic, which is ironic. But what I mean is, like, if you're building things that you're building kind of line of business apps where you're just like, okay, the person goes to this page, they see this form, and they can create data, and then they go from here and they go to the next page, and they can, like, you're not making like a Google Maps kind of thing, or what you're making is, just something you can form-driven, simplistic but massive, and you want a lot of people working on it at once. I think Ember would be probably a really good fit for that. And then finally for CanJS, for CanJS, I think is what CanJS is really designed for is being pretty much good at everything, great at nothing, but what I think it really excels at is you're building a very complex, like single-page, weird, different type of app. Like CanJS is very much designed to be able to build anything with, but it doesn't really build any one thing much easier than anything else. That's kind of how I would look at CanJS. And it's fast as everybody else, or faster. Yeah, I think it's like if you're trying to build like something really, like, I would say, sexy. You're trying to build something that's like different, especially not using normal conventional user experience kind of paradigms, not very form-based. I think CanJS is really going to shine there. Its defined plugin is really nice. So that's my spiel on different technologies. I don't know if anybody has anything else to share.
Yeah, so one thing that I guess you didn't talk about is like memory usage and memory leaks of the different frameworks. I know I've had issues with that in Backbone and in Angular where you had to do a lot of stuff manually to prevent memory leaks. You can talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I can mostly talk about it in terms of how the lengths that CanJS goes to prevent memory. That might be unique in most frameworks, if not all frameworks. So I'll do my best to talk about that in terms of how CanJS works. So like, I don't know the situations that they come up from as much as Angular, or like with Angular, but for like CanJS, let's say, what's one of the, like, there's like little subtle things that it does all the time. Like, if I have, let's say I have a div on the page, it's got some live binding, full name. Uh-oh. Let me take a quick pause while I go and plug in my laptop. I noticed my computer's running slow, and that's probably because it's about to shut itself off. All right. Plugged in. So, are you guys still with me?
Still here.
Awesome. Okay, so full name. Let's say I had full name, and in a template, in a CanJS template. Well, what this has to do to work in CanJS, and maybe React doesn't have this problem because it doesn't. In some ways, React escapes this problem because you always have to tell when to update, so there's no bindings involved in the template engine. But with CanJS, if I had my full name, compute. I had my person. Here's my full name. So if I had, let me put this on different lines so we can see all nicely together. Okay, so I have me and I have full name that is a compute based upon the properties in me, and then I have in my template here. What CanJS will do is bind on full name, and then only when full name is bound for the first time does it actually run this function to and find out what this function is binding to, which is first and last, and then only binds then on me for its first and last property. This has got to be unique. When you go div, if I were to remove this div with jQuery even from the page, When this live binding is set up, it also sets up a listener on the div for if the div is removed to unbind from full name. And then when that unbinding from full name happens, it knows to unbind on the first and last property of me. So that means that if I were to remove every element in the page, typically in a CanJS application, all of your data would tear down all the bindings to all your data. So if your data was no longer used anywhere in your application, the garbage collection could take over and automatically remove that memory from your app. So CanJS takes a lot of precautions to make sure memory is safe, and that I would actually thanks for bringing that up, Kevin. That is probably one of its stronger features.
Cool. And then the only other thing that I wanted to ask is, you mentioned earlier that one of the awesome things about Angular is you can just put kind of your custom elements directly into your HTML. You don't have to do anything to, get those to work. Can you talk about CanJS and what you have to do in order to get your custom elements into the page?
Yes. So
I think that's what you're saying was the benefit of Angular, right? Is that you can put your custom components or elements right in your HTML.
That's really, I mean, it's really nice, right? Like to say to, hey, designer, just go put this script tag in your page, and then you have custom elements. So let me talk about it again. So with Angular, right? I'm not like, for the most part, the Angular, if I just have like date picker, I can, for the most part, I can just put this in my body. Now, if you wanted to like support browser, I think like IE8 maybe doesn't support custom elements, so you have to put in like some special, something special. Like if you want to bottom load there's a few things you have to do. There's like, what is it, ng?
Yeah, put like ng app on your body, and then
Okay.
as long as your date picker is part of that module or whatever, it should work.
There's also like a shield or a clone, or it's like a shadow.
You can do ng cloak so that it'll like hide it until that thing gets registered.
Yeah, so I can like, its class name like ng cloak, right, or something.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know for sure.
Something like that. But also, there's something you have to do here to make it so that date picker, it knows about date picker before.
Yeah, that's the ng app. If you put ng app equals whatever, my app, and date picker is a part of that app.
But I can't just put ng app here and do that.
No, yeah, you can.
Huh?
ng app equals, and then
not if you want. I'm almost certain of this. Not if you want. And please correct me, because if I was actually loading Angular here, if I'm loading Angular, the old browsers would not it'll just be element unknown and won't even have any elements inside of it. There's no way Angular can do anything about that if Angular hasn't loaded before date picker.
Yeah, I'm not sure for IE8. I think they dropped support for IE8, so I'm not.
Oh, so
I think there's a shim or something you need, but I don't know.
There's something you had to do where like there's something you could where CanJS uses this for IE8 support. The reason why I know this is we have to do this for CanJS a little bit, not as difficult as what you have to do for Angular, where there's there's that shim that we load if you're using IE8. What's it called? It's attributed to it. I can't remember the name.
It's like the ES5 shims, everything.
Yeah, ES5 shim or something. No, it would be like HTML5. It's maybe HTML5 shim or something like that. Here it is. HTML5 shim. You have to like somehow call HTML5 shiv with you have to somehow call HTML5 shift with your custom elements, so it knows that browsers know support it. Those old browsers, anyways, because who cares about them? For the most part, this is all you need to do is just kind of, put your date picker in the page and load Angular, and then your source code, like your app.
Right.
And you just have to watch out for the flash of unstyled content, if that's going to exist. Like, right, if I've got like something in here, date or something, this, you don't want to show the user date like this until Angular has had a chance to kind of load and replace date with whatever in the scope. CanJS is a little bit different now. Instead of CanJS, you have to put everything in a script tag, and you give it the can auto render script tag, and then you just put your same code that you would mostly do in there. And this definitely, I mean, it's fine. You can do it this way. It's not as glamorous as what Angular allows. And then this would be like command.jQuery.js in your app. Cool. Good question. Anything else? Any other questions on the board?
Gitter chat is clear.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Kevin and Alexis. Hopefully that was one. I guess just one person's opinion on the state of JavaScript and module loaders. It's valuable.
Yeah.
Right.
Stay tuned. Next week we're going to be deep diving into CanJS. Everyone's seen bits and pieces of it so far, but next week we're kicking it off with a CanJS overview, followed by testing. We might restructure the schedule a little bit, so keep an eye on the calendar, but other than that, we'll see you guys next week.
All right, see ya.
Yeah.